Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Ronnie Kumar, and I am the GIS analyst, so a spatial data analyst for the Environmental Justice Program at CDPHE. So excited to talk, specifically about this tool that I work on called Colorado EnviroScreen, but can also try to do, some deeper background on the Environmental Justice Program here at CDPHE, or at least connect you to the right people because there's a lot of people on our staff now. Yeah, so to start, I today was just gonna do, I can go pretty technical. I'm gonna start with just an overview of the mapping platform and we can talk through it. I will flag that we are in deep development of the second version, which we're hoping to release by the end of November. So some of the things you see on the live platform now will look pretty different by the end of the year, but we're also looking for a lot of community feedback. We're gonna be doing public feedback for comments on our proposed changes over the summer. So this is a good time to sort of get an intro of what this tool is and then be really well positioned to give us feedback going into the second version. So with that, I'm going to present a slideshow. We can keep it kind of informal and folks can interrupt and ask questions. I'm definitely in the data side of the world, but can, speak to other portions. So if people really want to dive deep on some of these data questions, happy to do that as well. All right, can folks see my screen? Great. So like I said, I think my full title is like Environmental Justice Research and GIS Analyst. So that's a lot on one business card. But I work in the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environmental Justice Program. And for those who haven't interacted too much with CDPHE, we are the state agency for Colorado that regulates both public health and environmental spheres. So my positionality in the environmental justice program, we are more on the environmental side. So we work with air, hazardous waste, and water divisions, but we collaborate pretty closely with our public health side of the division as well. And Colorado is very unique in that we have both public health and environment paired together compared to other states and how states operate these agencies. So I can send these out after, but these are just some resources about the first version of our Colorado EnviroScreen tool, which is our state's environmental justice mapping tool. There's the, page to access. We have everything, goal is to be extremely transparent, open source. So all of our reports, our guides, and our input data, our GIS files, if you want to play with our data yourself. And we even have everything from the way we process our data code up. And then I'll also highlight we have, in collaboration with the University of Colorado, story maps on areas that have been highlighted as having higher environmental inequities. And so really trying to bring in that storytelling piece for communities, rather just labeling communities as higher risk with a number. So what am I really talking about today, though? Going back, this timeline clearly needs to be extended. I can't believe we're in May of 2024. But environmental justice at CDPHE has had a pretty big shift, I would say, since 2021. So before 2021, environmental justice was enacted as like a concept and a pillar throughout CDPHE, but it was not a formal, it was not like a formal part, or there was not a formal department that dealt with this within CDPHE. So in 2021, Governor Polis signed something called the Environmental Justice Act, and this had a lot of cascading effects. One being the establishment of the program that I work for, which I believe I think last week, we're now officially going to be an Office of Environmental Justice. So you can sort of see the progression of from it was a unit to a program to now an office. Within that, CDPHE had been working on an environmental justice tool behind the scenes for quite a while and had an internal one. But with the signing of the Environmental Justice Act, it sort of all merged and we came out with EnviroScreen, and it was a collaborative effort with Colorado State University. So that was launched, the first version, in June of 2022. And since then, it's been pulled into a lot of sections of Colorado. So really, when I'm speaking about EnviroScreen, there's a lot of things that our tool does. There's a lot of way to visualize data, and we're focusing on transparency and accountability for the government when we're making decisions. But a huge part of what makes Colorado EnviroScreen really impactful for our state is this concept of cumulative impacts. So when we're talking about environmental justice, typically, we focus on one media at a time. So we're thinking, air impacts, water impacts, or proximity to hazardous sites. And then, another layer of that is public health concerns. What Colorado EnviroScreen does is it pulls together 35 different data sets or indicators, and we layer them up to see where our community is experiencing these cumulative burdens. So it's not to say that poor water quality in one area is not important, but we're really curious to see where is poor water quality, where is, where is there possibly older populations on top of low income, on top of, possibility of exacerbated risk for wildfire. So really stacking these indicators up to see where is the highest burden in Colorado, and then using that as a metric for when we talk about communities with higher environmental injustice risk. So like I said, this was developed in collaboration with Colorado State University and then subject matter experts from CDPHE. We are now, for our second iteration, collaborating closely with the Colorado School of Public Health and CSU as well. So this is what you look at when you have the first EnviroScreen map up. It's this score. We mark it here as least to most burden, but it's really a percentile ranking. So 0 to 100. Areas with 0 burden, that's a way to say they have less risk compared to these areas with 100 or the most burden. So it's a little hard to tell on this screen, but this is what that map is doing for us. It's showing 0 to 100, where is this higher cumulative burden across the state. There is a second way in which EnviroScreen is used along with that cumulative score. We are, part of the Environmental Justice Act was defining disproportionately impacted communities across the state. So one way we do that is with the Colorado EnviroScreen score. Areas above an 80th percentile are considered disproportionately impacted communities. They have this cumulative burden, but there are other parts of that definition that we also display on our map. So when we're thinking about this Environmental Justice Act and how CDPHE is sort of enacting the parts of that act, a big part of EnviroScreen is this DI definition. So I call it the DI definition. So to go back to the main purposes of EnviroScreen, really we're looking to see where cumulative environmental health disparities across Colorado, and we are helping to display this statutory definition of disproportionately impacted communities. So I'll get into both of those topics, but the first one is sort of the science and the data and methods of this cumulative score, and the second one is really displaying this this definition. And go ahead, yeah, I can't see my chat, so Liz.
Yeah, I wondered about that, Ronnie. Thank you so much. We had a question, if you could explain what an ombudsman, I'm not saying it right. Ombudsman.
I think it's ombudsperson, and I only know that because I interact with Marcus a little bit. So yeah, the state's ombudsperson. What Marcus does, Marcus Howell is the person in that position currently for CDPHE, and he's sort of an outside observer, and he has a complaint system that he runs that is specifically for environmental justice complaints across the state. And so he spends a lot of time interacting with communities, and then when he has a complaint submitted, helping them navigate the really complicated regulatory and just honestly complicated system of state agencies within CDPHE and external of how do we address that complaint. I think a really good example of this is the work that they did in Apple Tree, which is a mobile home park. I believe it's in Garfield County. In that community, mobile home parks often have really poor water quality because they're on these smaller water quality systems. And it's, they can meet the drinking water quality standards, but there can be issues in the level of minerals that are bleaching people's clothes, causing, itchy skin, or bleaching people's appliances or staining them. So this is a huge issue, but there was not really there's not somebody who just dealt with mobile home water quality at CDPHE. So communities, could get their runaround because it's not really, it's not one person's domain, it's multiple domains. And it also includes DOLA, which has the mobile home community oversight program. So there's a lot happening there. So, partially with Marcus's advocacy as the ombudsperson, they actually were able to develop and pass legislation that specifically addressed mobile home water quality issues. And now we have a whole mobile home water quality team within CDPHE that works with DOLA So that sort of that chain of, getting a community complaint, that's a really good example of success of, here's an issue we're having, how do we address that? And having one person coordinate and help communities go through that process. Again, I think he would probably say he can't do that for all issues, but I feel like that's a really amazing highlight of things that can be done through that system. And feel free to interrupt me or raise your hand. I'm not looking at my chat right now. But I did want to step back and give the context of environmental justice mapping as a whole. I'm a GIS analyst. I spend a lot of time thinking about maps. I really love maps, and this whole concept of environmental justice mapping is really a new field within the environmental sphere. Not to say that it hasn't existed before, but it's become a huge branch of what is done in environmental justice. And really the two questions, or the central questions are, where do environmental hazards exist and who live near those hazards? And so thinking about like, what are people being exposed to and what are burdens, potentially health burdens or socioeconomic burdens that community already has. The sort of gold standard, one of the more recognized environmental justice platforms is one hosted by the EPA called EnviroScreen. And so this is the federal version of a tool, and it has a lot of data layers that give a lot of information across the US related to air, hazardous waste proximity, all those factors that we also include in EnviroScreen. So at the federal level, you'll see a lot of these tools, and it's really important to understand like the universe. Each tool has a slightly different use, but I think they're a really important way to answer different questions because they're each doing slightly different things. EnviroScreen is really looking at these individual, they'll have indexes, but it's sort of looking at these broader questions. And of course, their data as the EPA, they have really strong environmental data. The White House has a tool called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool that specifically focuses on, I guess, climate and economic justice. So really focusing in on sort of some of those more economic pieces, and is used for the Justice 40 funding. So when you talk about Justice 40, it's the CGIS, we call the CGIS tool. And then the CDC a few years ago came out with their own environmental justice index, which is a little more focusing on public health. And so it's their, what they do similar to us is they produce that cumulative score. So these tools all have different purposes and use, and they're super important as we build this dialogue of, where are environmental justice burdens and how are we actually addressing them? And what you'll see across the states, and this is actually now fairly outdated for 2021, is that individual states have also been developing their maps in tandem with federal level maps. California, of course, was first with Cal EnviroScreen, so we took their name, but they really have they're on their 4th version of their tool, and they set this concept of creating a cumulative score. We work closely with Washington, Oregon, California, New Jersey, Connecticut, and we even have had Idaho and Missouri are all developing these maps as well. And so really the transition to state maps in part is that states can have, state-specific concerns. So in Colorado, obviously wildfire is a huge concern. Proximity to oil and gas and mining are particularly Colorado considerations. And so in these state tools, you'll find more state-specific data as well as there are these questions for the state that are relevant. So that's what we've done with Colorado EnviroScreen, is include Colorado specific concerns to really come up with this idea of what is the cumulative impact in Colorado. So I'm going to go into this a little bit, but this is really if you're engaging and looking for the EJ grants program or other grants programs from other state agencies, this definition of disproportionately impacted community will probably come into play a lot. This is now a standardized definition for all state agencies, and that we display on EnviroScreen and through our mapping platforms. So like I said, this DI definition comes originally from this Environmental Justice Act. And for a mini geography lesson, we are using census data. So this can be pretty confusing if you don't work with census data. The units of measure are not necessarily intuitive, but it's really based on population density. And so the size of these geographies are based on how many people live there. So we're going to be using the smallest unit called a block group, and these form bigger areas called census tracts, and then they fit along counties. So counties essentially are broken up into block groups. So when we talk about the DI definition, you're using the census block group area, and it can feel a little non-intuitive because it doesn't map, how you would maybe think of an area, but it's the census measure. This is written by my now former boss, but he's a lawyer, and so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically there's an update to the bill. It was House Bill 23-1233 is now where that definition lives. And like I said, it standardized this definition before sort of the, CDOT and Colorado Energy Office and all these other agencies had sort of different takes on the definition. Now we all are using the same definition of disproportionately impacted communities, though there is the ability for an agency to prioritize based on sort of the decision they're making. But we all are working from the same universe that the legislature set. So there are about 9 categories here, and all of these areas in Colorado meet that state definition of a disproportionately impacted community. And the first bucket that we have are demographic criteria. And so these are just thresholds on demographic data from the Census Bureau. So if the area you live in, the census block group you live in meets any of this, you are considered a DI community in Colorado. So it's over 40% low income households, over 40% people of color households, over 50% are housing cost burden, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their monthly earnings on rent or mortgage, or if they're 20% linguistically isolated, meaning there's limited English speaking households. So like I said, that first bin is just thresholds on demographic data from the Census Bureau. So you're either above or below, and that's that line for a DI community. The next bucket is, again, that cumulative impacts criteria where our EnviroScreen score comes in. Areas in Colorado that are above the 80th percentile Colorado EnviroScreen score qualify as DI communities. We also, in that bill, in that act, any census tract that meets that Justice 40 definition also qualify. And so that's that White House economic justice screening tool. Along with that, there's this bucket of other criteria. So if a community does not meet any of the definition criteria, they can apply with a state agency to say, actually, we have this history, and here's, showing our history of perhaps redlining or other discriminatory laws or policies to advocate to be included as a DI community. Areas under tribal jurisdiction in Colorado, so the Ute, Mountain Ute, and Southern Ute reservations, the tribal governments have agreed to be part of this DI community designation. And now all registered mobile home parks in Colorado also meet that definition. So it's sort of a long list, and it can be, I think it took me like 4 months to fully wrap my head around what's happening here. But this is set by that statute. We display all of this data, and we provide this 80th percentile score in EnviroScreen. So we do a few things. And I can pause there for any questions, but I'm going to switch to this next one because I think it's a little easier to see on a map. So I will show you how to access this, but this is what that map looks like. Again, it's a census block group level. So it's not, you're probably not used to seeing Colorado split up like this, but that's how it's divided. You can see a lot of areas meet this more than the, I don't know what color, pink, red, more than one category there's multiple ways to meet the definition. And then going on from there, you have each of the individual criteria. So you can meet the definition in more than one way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to go to Colorado EnviroScreen and click on that DI layer. There's tons of data in Colorado EnviroScreen, so we can go into that more deeply. But for a lot of folks who are interacting with the government, they really want to just know how to get this DI definition. So I'm going to show you that first. So we have, if you're going to use EnviroScreen a lot, I would bookmark this page, which let's see, which will be sort of like the living, we're going to have, multiple versions and other things processing throughout the years. So this will always be the CDPHE homepage of EnviroScreen. And I can try to zoom in, maybe I won't. So when you land on this homepage, we have a lot of different options, sort of explore your own adventure, but there's tons of the resources and guides. Typically I have office hours once a month, so they'll be on here, or we're going to be doing like our seminar on the proposed updates. So we have events here, or sometimes events in person that you can come to. And just so you know, all the definition information is here for the DI definition, and then just tons of resources and ways to download our data. So going back up to the top, the big green button, go to Colorado EnviroScreen, is where we have the tool itself. If you're into platforms, this is our Shiny platform, which we will actually be transitioning away from, but this is what our version 1 looks like right now. So it has a ton of resources at the top, a lot of information that you can look at through these different tabs. Basically, the user guide is sort of broken up into these different tabs. And you scroll all the way down to the middle of the page, and this is where you'll see the map itself. I won't go into this green toolbar too much, but if you want to explore the individual data, it's all there that goes into that cumulative score. And whenever you do an update to this map, you do have to just make sure you click your option. I just changed the geographic scale, and you hit update map. So that's the key, is always hitting update map for whatever change you make here. So like I said, this is that original screenshot of cumulative burden. It's a little hard to tell with the purple, but areas that are darker are considered more highly burdened. I'm going to come back down here, and I'm going to go to the left side of the map. There's this yellow box with the layers, like sheets on top of it. That box allows you to switch on different layers. So I'm going to hover over it, and I'm going to turn off the indicator score and turn on this VI community layer. Like I said, this is that statutory definition. I'm also going to turn on the mobile home communities, and you can see all the mobile home communities in Colorado. And there are a couple other layers in there that I can give explanations if people are interested. But as you can see, those buckets are there of how they meet that DI definition. And if it's a mobile home community, it has that yellow dot. But I'll go ahead and zoom in to an area. And when you go to a census block, so these are those sort of census divisions outlined in black, when you click on that area, this pop-up explains exactly how that area is meeting the definition. So for this one, yes, higher population of people of color, higher EnviroScreen percentile score gives you the score there, and it also meets that federal definition as well. So you can do that throughout Colorado and see how an area is meeting that DI definition. When you hover over mobile home community, it gives you the name of that mobile home community. And so you can explore throughout and get that data. Like I said, this platform is going to look pretty different in, I guess it's not that soon. It feels soon for me in November. But for right now, you can play with that data and see what that score, those scores are throughout the state. We do have an address bar. It's a little quirky and doesn't always work. So if you're getting frustrated and it's not working, just patience, or getting the exact address can be the way to do that. But I often, if I know the area pretty well, just prefer to zoom in with my mouse. So feel free, if you have a question, to raise your hand, but that's how you just explore that DI layer. It's, again, this yellow square, and then you're clicking on and off these layers with this blue check mark to see. While we're here, I'll put on the story map layer. You can access this through a couple ways, but the story map shows areas in Colorado that have been flagged as having higher burden, and you can go read more of a community narrative about these communities with community voice. Again, this is a project with the Colorado Journalism, CU Boulder Journalism Program. So cool way to explore that there through either the story map layer, or if I go all the way back to the home page, you can also just click here. And our newest one was a collaboration with the Mountain Ute tribal government, and it has more history about that region in Southwest Colorado. Okay, let's see. I go a little bit more into the methods and details, but I won't, if people don't have questions, I probably won't spend too much more time. But just as background on that the score, that cumulative 80th percentile score that we have, it was a really long process to get it to this final tool version, and it included a lot of community engagement. So, talking to Coloradans about what indicators they did want to have, understanding what data was available, and thinking through the methods of it all, and then testing out that final platform and the way the data was being shown. And really what that cumulative score is doing is taking environmental burden and population characteristics and aggregating them together to show where there's overlapping burden. So in total, there's 35 indicator data sets that go into the tool, and then they are, through a ranking score, put together to come up with that final 0 to 100 comparison. The way the buckets break down, we have in pollution and climate burden, we have direct environmental exposures. So these are things like air pollution, drinking water quality, noise, things that are directly happening to an individual exposure. Environmental effects are more proximity to hazardous effects like Superfund sites, oil and gas or mining sites. For climate vulnerability, Colorado right now is the only tool in the state level tools to take into account climate. And so we include wildfire risk, drought, flood, and extreme heat days. For health and social factors, we have the sensitive populations, which is more getting at that health burden that a community has. So things that are directly impacted or caused by pollution, like asthma, cancer, also mental health are included in sensitive populations. And then for demographics, we're looking again at Census Bureau data, topics like access to level of education, limited English-speaking populations, as well as socioeconomic, housing cost burden, etc. So these all get pulled together and they come into this final EnviroScreen score that is compared across the state. And here's a breakdown of every single indicator that's in that pollution and climate burden bucket. So the environmental exposures get weighted more heavily as they are what we consider to be the riskier exposures compared to, sort of can be impacted by distance. These two are weighted by half, the climate and the environmental effects. And we have, again, the disease, the health sensitive population bucket, and the demographic bucket. So all of our data sources, it's a combination of federal and state, but again, the benefit of having a Colorado state level tool is that we're able to use Colorado data directly. For example, for our mining operations, our air pollution, and a lot of that hospitalization data are directly from Colorado data sets. Yeah, so there's again that concept of the cumulative impacts, and I can show you more on the tool if you want to click around. But just some big important caveats for using tools like this. EnviroScreen has a lot of uses, and it's really amazing to see the data all together in one place. But it is also not the end-all be-all of telling a community story. We are not able to define every type of injustice or every specific environmental burden. We're a state level tool, so we are kept at the state level data. If we don't have data on something, we can't display it. And like I said, we're not able to have all environmental exposures that a community might be facing in this tool. And you might have noticed when I put the map on, we are using those Census Bureau geographies, which in less densely populated areas, especially rural Colorado, those are huge. They're really big census block groups because not a lot of people live there, so it's taking into account a lot of space. So that's just important to note that we're not using the same unit to compare everybody all the time. It's it's one way to look at how a population is being impacted, but you have to understand there could be neighborhood level injustices, there could be other things that are happening that we can't capture on a map because of the the data set being small. We are, like I said, in the process of updating to version 2.0 for anybody who works in more of the regulatory space. This is a really big deal because it will change, areas that are marked as DI because there's going to be new data coming in. And so we're really committed to documenting and archiving everything that we do. So there's transparency in this tool. And like I said, it's planned for the end of 2024. There are a ton of ways that people use the tool. I'm always really excited to learn about new ones. I interact mostly with state agency partners who are using it related to the DI definition, but I have everyone from researchers at UC Health who are using the data for like an asthma study in children, to other academic partners looking at local occurrences and trying to see if they can give us advice on how to make the tool better, and lots of work with community universities around Colorado. So it's been really cool to see how the tool is used in all these varying ways. I don't know if I'll go too deep into this, but we had a first year and it went pretty well, but still lots of learning and lots of exciting ways that we're collaborating and working with others across the state. And for everything with EnviroScreen, for the second version, we're considering updates to everything and anything, and really seeking community input. So I can go more into that, but that's a huge part of this push for the update. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but happy to dive into any questions.
Thank you, Ronnie. And am I saying that right, Ronnie? Okay. Liz Chapman, I'm the Executive Director of Recycle Colorado. I don't know that we met when we were doing our round of introductions. Thank you, number one, for putting this together. This is a fascinating tool. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll start with one to hopefully get other people to give their questions over. I am curious how the Colorado EnviroScreen interfaces with those federal tools, those federal mapping devices. Can you explain more what the Colorado version does that the federal versions don't, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. That's why I said it's been really interesting to be in this space to see how everyone, is working together to make these mapping tools, because in my last role, I mostly worked with EJScreen. Like that was sort of my go-to mapping tool. And so we work really closely with our Region 8 counterparts, the EPA as well, to stay in communication about what we're doing. But the kind of depends on the tool you're talking about. Colorado EnviroScreen is able to use more like the Colorado data. Like I said, we're using our own health data. So it's updated a little more frequently, and it can answer like sort of more specific data questions for Colorado. We are very fortunate to live in a state that has a lot of data resources. Other states across the US do not have as, sometimes don't have those data resources or transparency. For example, our oil and gas and mining data sets that we have are not available across the entirety of the US. So tools like EPA EJScreen or the CDC EJI index have to stay at data sets that are available across the whole US. So they're using data that like they could from Texas to Alaska to Hawaii use, and we have that advantage of we have some more granular data that we can use in Colorado because we have a more robust data system. So that's one way, is that we can use this sort of more granular data. And then in a second way, compared to some of the other tools, they're not going to be taking into account, again, like I said, the Colorado specific questions. So I've seen in, like I said, in other tools, they're not going to be including like those oil and gas measures or wildfire or like our drought, flood, extreme heat days, because those are not the questions that those tools are trying to address. So for example, the CGIS tool, I don't remember all of what they include, but again, they're focusing a little more broadly on the like economic portions, which is not really our question. We're not really as looking toward like workforce outcomes. We're looking more towards like these environmental burdens. So that's one way. We also include race in our tool, which is not common across a lot of the tools, but it's part of our disproportionately impacted community definition. And we've seen it does make an impact in Colorado compared to the climate and economic justice tool does not include race. So there's things like that, but then specifically that definition of cumulative impacts is the way that Colorado EnviroScreen, its main function is to provide that metric for the DI definition. So we're looking at what are the environmental health burdens in Colorado, and how do we measure that for that DI definition. And I think things like EJScreen have a sort of broader, more data exploratory purpose. So again, I think they use them in tandem. We use CDC data and we use EPA EJScreen data in the tool. So there is a lot of overlap. It's just a kind of the question of purpose and use by the end of it.
Thank you. And we'll pause and invite other folks to chime in with any questions or clarifications. So one of the things that I have used this tool for is we were writing a grant. Unfortunately, we did not get the grant, but we were writing a grant for the DOE, and this tool proved to be really helpful in terms of proving to making part of our application, we are going to be positively impacting these disproportionately burdened communities, and having that map gave us the tools we needed to outline that. Could you speak more to how you've seen other grant applicants use this tool to inform what their grant is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that it's really interesting with the disproportionately impacted community definition that we're all able to speak like a similar language now across these spaces, because my first year in the environmental justice program, you really do interface with a lot of folks who have never had to consider environmental justice as a concept in their work. Not that they necessarily don't value it, but it just hasn't fit in. So I think it's powerful. And I always have the caveat of like, it's not the end all be all of how to describe justice. So I do worry a little bit about the sort of checkboxing that can happen with all of these things. And I also am very confident in our data ability to show at least like, these are areas with concerns and like, let's talk about it versus like, this is the only concern. That's just my caveat of like, I think it's really powerful. And I do worry about, narrowing our vision of, just numbers tell the whole story. The way I've seen it used, and I think the thing that I would have, if I was in another job, found it most powerful is just the transparency and the ability to access data. Yeah, hi Laura. And the thing that, there's been a lot of county folks who are, it's really hard to take all those data points and figure out what the asthma rate is at a census block group level and all these things. And so by making this data just in one spot and getting all the printouts, I think that can be really helpful. That's a big thing we're pushing for EnviroScreen 2.0 is we're going to have a report functionality, so you can just get that data and essentially have that report, and you can fill in your own data and make that story there. So I think that would be the way I've seen it, is just like making that data accessible. I think it's a little harder now because you have to be able to understand our spreadsheets and pull it all out, but getting to that report level would be important. And it is really hard. I still have a hard time learning how to navigate each of those, the Census Bureau website, the Colorado State Forest Service website, our health data. And so not having to go be an expert in all of those data sets yourself, but have like a validated data source. And, if anything's wrong, you can blame CDPHE program. I think that's where I see the biggest boon. And I also, California EnviroScreen, they've been around for 10 years now. And the thing that team said that really stuck with me is that it has really helped give visibility to communities that have, for so long known that they've had these issues and have always had to fight to have somebody show, that they can be believed in a lot of ways. And so just having the data out there and then having that accountability of the government saying this is the data that's out there are the two biggest powerful ways I see it going. And I think there's a lot to learn. We're pretty much on the frontier of environmental justice mapping across the US. So I think we have to learn together as Colorado, like, how does this work? How does this not work? And what are the ways we can make it better? So that's my thought.
Hayden, it looks like you came back on camera. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. Hayden Van Andel from the town of Breckenridge. Sorry if I missed this, but I'm curious how the I guess the enviro mapping and the data associated with it, how it will be involved with grant submissions from communities, and how it's, I guess, the grants are taken in consideration with the data from the mapping, particularly with Summit County, seeing that a lot of our communities at least from most of the data that's collected, they aren't seen as kind of like those at-risk communities or communities that need additional resources in that sense. But a lot of our grant funding is going towards those groups that are identified, whether it's our bilingual community or a lot of our local businesses. So I'm just curious how the data from the screen is going to impact like grant submissions.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I mean, we have a specific environmental justice grant through our office that I can talk about a little bit. I have seen, it depends on the other state agencies, how they're running the grant of it being one category of like a DI community as a category, but then there's other levels, because sometimes it doesn't make sense to always talk about a project in like a geographical way. For the environmental justice programs grant, like our focus is on prioritizing the most burdened communities in Colorado. And when you are comparing across the state level, like the level of pollution in Commerce City, North Denver, or Pueblo, it is just much higher, and that's the sort of the focus of the state. So the way I've seen it play out is that particularly, there were concerns that areas that like smaller areas like mobile home communities were not being considered. And so that's why they've added that to the definition. That was not in the first round of the definition. So there will be like those pockets in those areas, like mobile home communities or areas with like limited English speaking. The data is not perfect in the sense that it's meant to be an idea. So I would say for grants that are one really specific to environmental justice, like they will probably continue to use that screening because they really do want the funds to go to communities that are sort of like in that crisis of pollution. But I do think there's a sense that people understand that there's broader types of pollution. So I would one, use the data. Every place has data on like what's happening. It could be wildfire risk or other issues, and use that data to make your case. And if there is like a really specific DI element, then I think just really articulating why that area does meet that. And if it's not through that statutory definition, there is that. I mean, the history prong is a little bit difficult because it really is meant to be about communities that were impacted by these more historic discriminatory policies. But I think making the argument of like how this is really going to serve this one population. There was an Office of Health Equity grant that I helped review, and I think really meaningfully showing how it's from a community that is, I don't know if the word is disproportionate, but like marginalized or underrepresented is important, because I think I'm not saying this is what would happen from your town, but like one thing that I have seen is this tendency to people want the check box of like, oh yeah, we have Spanish speaking people and they will be involved in this grant, but like really meaningfully making it more so. I know that's a really hard thing to achieve, but that would be my other point. So I think too that if it has been, you're really seeing this definition sort of hampering down where funding is going, I think also being really honest and giving that feedback to those grants. Like I said, the DI definition, especially for EJ considerations, is really important, but there are other funding sources that I think it's appropriate to consider when that DI definition is used. So I don't know if you can give feedback, but also just really making sure you're meaningfully explaining that. And if you can use our data to do that, that's also awesome. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard at the state level compared to the local level sometimes to navigate those comparisons. Yeah. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much.
I would jump in, and based on what you showed us, Ronnie, there is a metric about communities that spend over 50% of their salary on housing. And I think there's a significant portion of Breckenridge's community that probably qualifies there. I'm sure you have a mobile home park, and given how finely some of that data is parsed, I'll bet digging in deeper, you would see a few places where Breckenridge does fall on the side of we have a disproportionate burden. It looks like Ronnie is looking that up as we speak.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does look like Breckenridge has a census block group that's housing cost burdened. I can show you on the map. And that's an interesting point that you made, Liz, because they actually had a broader, the statute was broader for what areas were considered. So yeah, that chunk of Breckenridge. So if you could focus projects in that area, you meet the state definition of a DI community right there. But they had a broader definition of housing cost burden, and it was actually pretty controversial because it was bringing in areas, like a lot of areas like Aspen, and just the like sort of that dissonance of like comparing, you know, anyways, areas that have, it's just a really hard line to walk of like housing cost burden versus like environmental injustice. So but Breckenridge is falling under that area with, and actually interestingly, I don't see any registered mobile home parks in Breckenridge. So that's another thing. Oh wait, maybe I just don't have it on. That's why I was like, that's surprising. And there is a mobile home park in that bit. So there is, I don't know if we looked into the, I don't know anything about this Kingdom Park Court, but there's a specific mobile home water quality act now as well. And there's a lot of funding coming down through that. So that's been a huge issue with small water systems. And I actually think Summit County in particular, because of how you guys are placed, this is not my area, but with the way people get water to these mobile home parks and like from the river can be hard. So I don't know if that, you might know much more, but I can send you the information for that too.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll throw my email in the chat for you. But yeah, I'll definitely dig into that because that is curious.
And I would also say one thing that is, it's aligned but outside, is there's also a part of our program that does supplemental environmental projects. And so this is more for folks who are near, you know, hazardous or like industry sites. But oftentimes if there is a settlement or a fine with a group, one of the things they can do is a supplemental environmental project. So you can also submit like your idea for a what we call a STEP, and they can go into the STEP library and they could, you know, be chosen by a polluter to fund. So again, interesting ethics sometimes about how we fund, you know, like conservation with pollution, but it is an existing thing. And I think it's a really important way communities can get funds as well. So there's that STEP program. And then I'm looking for the, I'll just put the overall environmental justice page.
And forgive me for jumping in again, Ronnie. I'll let you go.
You're good.
Trying to make sure I'm making space for anyone to ask questions. So please feel free. We're going to be running out of time here shortly. But what you just said and Hayden's questions about Breckenridge, I wonder when you're looking, when this tool is examining environmental impacts from industry, is there a historical consideration? So what I'm getting at here is it's quite obvious that there are active industrial processes that are overburdening communities, but in the mountains, there are a lot of communities that have a legacy of environmental disturbance and contaminated soils. Is that factored into this map?
So we do have like so if it's an active Superfund site, it would be pulled in, or like sort of like flat. If it's in that EPA, I think it's RESI data set. We also are looking at like, you know, the water quality standards and other water considerations that might pick it up. Water is harder because it doesn't really follow those bounds of what we have in the census data. However, my like addendum to that is there are things like abandoned mining sites that there is not a data set for in Colorado. Like the Department of Reclamation Mining Services does not have an abandoned mining site data set. So with this 2.0 review, we really want people to bring us topics like that we could then take into account, because, you know, we don't live in all parts of the state and we don't have that knowledge. And so we are, if there is some type of pollution that we're not capturing, we would really want to try to figure out how to get that into the tool. So again, I think like abandoned mining sites would be, you know, we would need support to get that request to the DRMS, and then they would probably need funding to do all those things. But those are topics that I think is a really important way to build, like to use this tool to advocate for like where there are data gaps. Another one that it's not really, we're still trying to figure out how to include it. It's radon or like radiation, especially like uranium mill tailings. There is a lot of interest in putting that into the tool, but just like the logistics of figuring out, and radon is just like sort of a background issue for all of Colorado, and are we really able to like rank where it's worse or not? So there's a lot of data set questions that I think one thing this tool can do is really tee up the data questions for them people to go fill in. So that would be my hope of what we can do.
Yeah, to your point about the abandoned mining system, that's certainly something I'm thinking about for our mountain areas specifically. And that I don't know that it would be captured in water contamination because it's mostly high desert. So there might be contaminated soils that if you were to sample the soils themselves, they would exceed the thresholds of what is considered safe, but they're not necessarily showing up in the water because the precipitation rates are so low. And so I could see that.
I think all those topics, and again, we have this sort of like team of academic experts, and so they can take that into account. And I think one other thing by giving feedback like that is that we are working with a lot of people who then if the EJ program can't do it, maybe that could come out of a study of like CSU or CSPH. So just raising these topics in this area can really be helpful to then like continue down on research.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. All right. I think we can stop recording, Allie.